Sudan's transitional government has agreed to normalize ties with the Israeli regime after the United States removed the African country from its terrorism blacklist and offered it financial aid in exchange. U.S. President Donald Trump sealed the normalization deal in a phone call on Friday with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Sudanese Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok and Transitional Council head Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. A joint statement issued by the trio said the leaders had agreed to the normalization of relations between Sudan and Israel and to end the state of belligerence between the two sides. An official signing ceremony is expected to be held at the White House in the weeks to come. The latest development follows an agreement between Sudan and the U.S., under which Washington agreed to remove Sudan from a list of countries it calls state sponsors of terrorism, unblocking economic aid to and investment in the African country. This has led some experts to speculate that Sudan's normalization with Israel had been a precondition for easing sanctions on the African country.
It's flagrant bribery. The U.S. is humiliating the people of Sudan by obliging its leaders to betray the Palestinian people, all in order that U.S. President Trump can score a cheap point, which won't amount to much in the U.S. elections.
Shortly after the joint statement, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hailed the new agreements with Sudan as the start of a new era in the region. He thanked Trump for setting the stage for the deal, saying Israeli and Sudanese delegations would meet soon to discuss commercial and agricultural cooperation.
Now, after the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, Sudan is the third country to have been pushed by the U.S. into a normalization deal with Israel since August. Both Israel and the U.S. had hinted that more countries were about to follow suit. So what's controversial about the Sudan deal is that the accord has been agreed by an interim transitional government. Now that raises doubt on whether an incoming government would adhere to the agreement. Now the recent trend of establishing ties with Israel began just weeks ahead of the presidential vote in the U.S., where President Donald Trump hopes to get re-elected. Does Trump need his Israeli allies to secure his win at the polls? Meantime, voices of opposition to the so-called normalization deals are getting louder, not only from Palestinians, but also from Muslims across the world. The Palestinians are worried that their rights are being trampled upon by Arab countries whose rulers are exchanging economic benefits with rights to their land.
Different Palestinian factions in the Gaza Strip and the occupied West Bank joined voices to condemn Sudan's decision to follow in the footsteps of the UAE and Bahrain and betray the Palestinian cause against the Israeli occupation. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said the Palestinians reject and condemn Sudan's move. A senior Palestine Liberation Organization official also said Sudan's move represented a new stab in the Palestinians' backs. He further noted that no one has the right to speak in the name of Palestinian people and in the name of the Palestinian cause. In turn, the Gaza-based Hamas resistance movement said the deal that Sudan struck with Israel is a political sin that harms both Palestinians and the Sudanese. It added that the agreement will only benefit the Israeli premier. The Sudanese are also voicing their anger at the transitional government's decision. Angry Sudanese protesters have taken to the streets in the capital Khartoum to condemn the move. The demonstrations are reminiscent of rallies in Bahrain against the Al Khalifa regime's deal with Israel. Sudan's National Ummah Party rejected any normalization with Israel, warning that if such a thing happens, the bloc will withdraw its support from the transitional government, which took power last year after longtime leader Omar al-Bashir was overthrown by the army.
There's tremendous resistance in Sudan to normalizing relations with the Israeli apartheid regime, just as there is in Bahrain, despite harsh repression by the Bahraini monarchy. And there's support, I should say opposition to it throughout the Arab world. In Sudan, the opposition to this normalization might even bring down the U.S.-friendly junta that was put in power in April of last year.
Historically, Arab countries agreed that no ties should be established with Israel unless it withdraws from the territories it occupied in the 1967 war and the establishment of a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem al-Quds as its capital.